Join me in welcoming co-creator, writer, executive producer, and actor Stephen Graham. Co-creator, writer, and executive producer Jack Thorne. Actor Owen Cooper. And the incredible Erin Doherty. Stephen, I wanted to start with you and just talking about the way that you played that first episode as Eddie, because there's so many details woven in through the script in your performance where we see that he's completely out of his depth. He's not familiar with the setting and how things are going to work, you know, right from the moment when the police come into his house and he says, I didn't do anything. But even then, once they're at the police station, everything is so new to him. And we really just see him trying to figure out, how do I navigate this for my son, and how do I take care of my son in this moment? And so I was interested in how that really became the driving force of that episode for you.
Just kind of I think one of the main things was not everyone's been in a police station. Do you know what I mean? So that kind of, even though the way I speak, no, that's a lie, I have been in the police station. But I was only a kid. And I didn't do it, and I wasn't guilty. Just crashed myself up, haven't I? But not everybody has been in a police station, even if they speak like me and come from where I come from. Although the BBC may think differently, but there you go. Just a comment. So basically, what we wanted to show was that he, as you just wonderfully described, he's completely out of his depth. He doesn't understand this whole process, and he's just wanting to be there for his son, and he's trying his best, and he's trying to keep it all together. And it's a horrific experience for him, and I think the same for, I think maybe that's why people could relate to it in certain ways, because if you put yourself in his shoes, it's every parent's nightmare to be confronted with something like that. And then especially, as parents, we believe our children, and we want to believe that they wouldn't have done anything what they're being, accused of. So it's right up until that final moment where they're shown the evidence that he believes his son, and even up until that moment where, he says to him, "Tell me the truth. Did you do it?" And he says no. So then when he goes into the room, he's convinced that his son hasn't done it, because if my son's looking at me in the face and telling me he hasn't done it, I believe he hasn't done it. And that's kind of an experience I've had from my own son and our Grace as well, when they've told me they haven't done things. And they did. Nothing like this though. I'm just talking like, I'm just talking like not putting a wash on or something like that, you know what I mean? So you believe them, and you're convinced, and I think that's what we try to show. Just a man who's completely out of his depth, and he's never experienced anything like this in his life.
And Jack, I mean, the writing is astounding on so many levels, but especially with the structure and the format of every episode being one take, because I imagine it was ever evolving, because you also have to time scenes based on how long does it take to travel from this location to this location, because the camera's not breaking. And so I was interested in how that really formulated an interesting exercise and creative structure, and then how it evolved because of the timing of scenes in practicality and rehearsals.
The mad thing was that the people who worked on this show were so good that actually they managed to fit the reality to the script. So you say that there was stuff we did. We changed the way that people walked in certain places, and we changed certain other things, and I wrote extra bits to accommodate other things. But like Adam, who's our set designer and is absolute genius, timed a scene going up the stairs so that it worked, so that the stairs were exactly as tall as they need to be. We are full of authors in this show. There are so many brilliant people that just took responsibility for telling this story, and that's why I think this show really worked, that everyone took that responsibility and everyone worked together.
Oh, and I wanted to ask about playing Jamie in episode 1, because the entire time he's maintaining, to his dad, which Stephen was just describing, he hasn't done anything. And even after the video is shown, he still says, I didn't do anything, Dad. And I was interested in just what your experience was of playing him throughout that episode, where he's maintaining his innocence, but he knows that he did it.
I think until the video was played at the end, I think he wants so badly for it to not be true, and he wants it to be a dream, and he wants it all to just go away. But if you've done something as bad as what he's done, it can't just go away. And he's done what he's done, and it'll never get away from him. So when he does see the tape at the end, he's letting his father down, which he's told him, he's looked him in the eye that he's not done it, and he's let his father down and will never get that respect from him again. So it was that disappointment in his father's eyes. And when Jamie touches him at the end, Eddie shrugs off and tries to get away from him and doesn't look him in the eye. And I think in episode 4, when he rings him to say he's changing his plea, sorry if that's a spoiler, but when he's changing his plea, I think that's another moment where he's let his father down. But that's what he believes. It might not be true, but he let his father down and will never get that respect off him ever again. So it was just playing that, because I've never been in a police station and never had to do that with my own dad. So it was a change in what I've experienced in my life. So, but yeah, it was fun to do it with Stephen. So yeah.
No, it's amazing. And Erin, I know that one of the things that you were really thoughtful about in your performance and in your character was the idea of mental agility. And it's this constant undercurrent of, we understand what she's going through, we understand the emotions that she's experiencing, but she can't flinch or show any emotion, because if she does, then she's lost in that moment. She doesn't have the power and she doesn't have the control. And I know that was something that was quite challenging for you. So how did you set about finding that restraint, but also making sure that the undercurrent came forward?
I think just sheer hope that it would come through. And yeah, I think belief in the writing, like it was all there on the page, and I just think I just had to know that if I did my job correctly and I did the prep correctly, then it would all be there. But actually, as you say, yeah, the most difficult thing for me, all the emotions were there, like that wasn't the task was keeping the boundaries in place. But yeah, as I say, it was just the hope that I wouldn't, that I would maintain that professional setup that I'd created for myself, and as you say, the mental agility and stamina really to just get through that session, knowing what I needed to achieve as Bryony. Yeah, it was just being my own filter in that sense, as a therapist, and bringing myself back to the task at hand. So that definitely paved the way for me to navigate it. But also it was just about being present and being in the room with Owen and letting that take care of itself.
And Stephen and Jack, in talking about the writing and some of the perceptions of himself that Jamie has, I wanted to ask about some of the conversations and questions that people asked you at one point about, we've cast an actor who's a good-looking boy. Does it still make sense that he says, I'm not attractive, I'm ugly, nobody likes me? And that the idea is really, it's his perception of himself and it's what he believes, so it doesn't matter what the exterior is. And I was interested in kind of how you came to that decision and the conversations.
I think that's the most interesting thing. And yeah, that was a discussion that happened, and it was placed in front of me. They were like, do we need to rework this moment? And I said, no. And they said, look at him, he's not ugly. And I said, but he believes he is. And he believes he is because, and this is the really important thing about Jamie, he looks out in the world and he only sees hate. He only sees hate from the world around him. He doesn't believe that he's likable. He doesn't believe he's lovable. He doesn't believe he's attractive, because that's what he gives out and that's what he gets back, and that's why he's got himself into this hole. So it's really important that it's actually even better, that we didn't go through the casting process. We didn't say to Shaheen, we need a brilliant actor who's from the north and is, a good-looking boy. That just came because Owen was brilliant and the best. But the fact that he is good-looking actually really helped the story, I felt.
And Stephen, I wanted to talk about Eddie's relationship with his wife Manda, which, for those of you who haven't seen episode 4, you learn and kind of see a lot more of that. but just this journey that Eddie goes on of constantly questioning, what could I have done differently? Is there anything that we could have done? And just that kind of hopelessness of feeling like he wasn't able to protect or reach his son and thought that he was safe because he was inside his bedroom.
That was played by Christine Tremaco, who is magnificent. And like Erin said, look, it's partners. We all dance together. It's a collaboration. And one of the beautiful things about that was me and Christine have known each other since we were kids. Our mums were really good friends. You know what I mean? And we're from the same area in Liverpool. We're both from Kirby. Oh, she's got a Liverpool top on there, nice one. Champions. So basically, we spent, one of the beautiful things about how this whole process works is we get this wonderful script. And I remember, especially for episode 4, but right at the very beginning, actually with episode 1, we spent, me, Owen, Christine and Amelie, we spent 4 days in that house in the living room with Jack and with Phil and with Matt, our DOP, and we just spoke, didn't we, about being a family and the kind of childhood they had and the relationship and the depth of the relationship that me and Christine had had. And I think one of the most beautiful things that Jack did, I mean, the phenomenal scripts, but what he wrote beautifully in episode 4 was he created a wonderful history where these two had known each other from the age of 13. A school disco, and they had all of that history and all of that knowledge of each other, and it was just very easy for me and Christine to tap into that. And that kind of, because when we were kids, we didn't have the internet. Well, mostly anyone who's like over 35, 40. So when you was in your bedroom and you were either drawing pictures or, playing with Star Wars figures, or you were doing things like that. So you were actually safe, do you know what I mean? You were in a safe place, really. You were in the house, so what harm could you actually be doing? But today, it's not like that. Kids can be in the bedrooms and they could be talking to people across the other side of the world, and who knows what kind of things they're being, how they may be being misguided, or they may be getting information about, anything really. So it just shows you that there's an endless possibility when they're in the room. And the naivety of Eddie is the fact that he thinks his son's safe, because when he was told to get to his room, he was safe in his room. And also that beautiful thing that, we discovered with each other as we were writing, bouncing ideas with each other, and then Jack wrote it so beautifully, that whole kind of speech of, and it was a mixture of what I'd shared with my Alfie and things like that, but buying him a computer because it's now what he feels like he wants to do. So you think you're encouraging him to do that, playing the games with his friends. Yeah, and that's what we said, because that's another thing. It's a future, it's a different thing. So for Eddie, it's like, well, if we get him that's what he'll become smart at, and that's what he'll train to be. He's not an electrician like me, but he might become some computer whiz kid.
It's amazing how much of the script is based on mine and Stephen's life in different places. The bit when he's talking about the disco and that, slipping over at the disco, I did that in front of the entire school. In one of the worst moments of my life.
In bowling shoes as well.
Bowling shoes.
Yeah, in bowling shoes that he got from a charity shop.
That I thought were really cool.
So that's the beauty of working together in that respect. Eddie gets to live out what Jack actually did. So
Eddie went home with a girlfriend that night. I bloody didn't.
Owen, you mentioned the phone call that he makes in the last episode when he tells his parents that he's changing his plea. And I remember you saying that was part of your audition, was that phone call, and that you got really excited about the idea of getting to play that scene if you got the part. And I was interested in what really excited you about that moment, because it's also a moment where we don't see you on screen during that phone call, but we hear all the emotion and the conversation.
I was excited to do it even before, because doing episode 3 and then 1 before 4 was perfect, because by 4 I knew Jamie, and because in episode 3, which we shot first, I was just learning about him. I was trying to figure out what he was, but by episode 1 I knew him, I knew what he was like. But especially by episode 4, when he was telling his dad that, it's heartbreaking really, and especially in the audition it was heartbreaking as well. So it was it's like one of my that's like one of my favourite. It's my favourite episode and favourite scene to do in the whole of the show. So yeah, I can't wait to do it.
And Phil brought him to set. You did that on set.
Yeah.
It was a live phone call.
And Owen and Erin, I also wanted to ask you about just the difference between filming the scenes at the beginning of your episode together and later, because you know the beginning of the episode is they have a bit of a rapport and you know they're able to kind of like joke around with each other a little bit, and then obviously it becomes much more serious as the episode progresses. And I've heard you discuss how the first part you kind of felt like you were able to kind of improvise a little bit more, but the second half felt like it had to be much more specific to the script. And so I just wanted to ask you both about the experience of filming it in that way.
I think in every episode there's times where you've got freedom and you've got to crack on at some point in the script. So the first part of the episode was fun to do because we were just messing about, and then I think Jamie didn't like it from the start, but then by the end of the episode he knows he's messed up and he just wants to be liked by someone. And then especially when she leaves, when he gets forced to leave, he's like, Brian, he's the last person he's got, so, and now she's gone, and won't ever see him again, so I think that's where he breaks really, so.
And also, like, the episode that you saw was our last go at that, like, that was our 11th take, so it was the Friday afternoon. We had been told, like, by Phil that they were like, but they've got one in the can, they're really happy with it, so we were like, right, this is free, like, we're just doing it for kicks. So we really went into it like, I'm gonna push your buttons now. So we were really playing with each other, which was so much fun. And like it's actually, in hindsight, it's no surprise to me that they chose that one because we were so, creatively excited to go into that room and see what we could do with this text that we knew so well. So there was the freedom to improvise, which just came naturally, and like we were saying things in that take that we'd never said before, even within the confines of like the improv, because like you can't really stray too far from what's being asked of you, but we were coming up with new things on that last day. But yeah, as the scene goes on, you don't want to mess with it because it's so beautifully orchestrated that you don't need to veer off that path that we've been given, because these characters are so gloriously put together, and you can feel the tension even when like you read it on the page. You're like, this is palpable, so you just want to get in there and say those words that you've been given. So we didn't want to mess with it.
Yeah, and plus, before that last take, I don't know if you felt it, but I thought we're never ever going to be able to do this ever again.
Yeah, it was special.
So I just wanted to go out there and just throw everything at Erin and at the end, when I'm smashing at the window, I'm only supposed to smash the first punch on the second glass, because the other ones aren't safe because I could punch through.
And they did tell you that, they were like, only do the first one.
Yeah, but I smashed every single.
Can you imagine though if you went through and it was like, right, well,
It
we're
would have
gonna
been
do that
better
one.
if I did that.
Yeah.
It would have been good if I did that.
I feel like you would have just committed to it.
So the thing about it, and what's really interesting there, is it's so beautifully written and so beautifully constructed that each word is thought out, the process of it is thought out completely. And what happens with that process, like I was saying earlier on, is Jack's present, and it's very rare you have a writer who's present, especially in television and film. You don't really have that opportunity to rehearse it like a play. So as we're there, and it's kind of slight, with the freedom to let the words escape you, but them to be locked in there, and like the first time you've ever said them. But what can happen then as well is, because Jack's present, he comes up with new things on the spot, doesn't he? And we think out things together, and then Jack just enhances it and puts it into the script. And there's also a bit where I think I've gone once or twice, so what's this? I don't really get this. And Jack explains it completely, and then you understand. So we got to really dive into the subtext and move with every single episode completely. And I think 3 episodes, if I'm mistaken, I think 3 episodes are all the final take. Yeah. So I think what you said as well, you know, it's only episode 1, which is the second take. So I think I don't think it's a coincidence that the last takes have been used on 3 of our episodes, you know what I mean?
Jack, with episode 3 as well, because it's so much a two-hander, I've heard you mention how it kind of felt like something very different for you to write and something that you were kind of trying to figure out the challenge of, and Stephen was really pivotal in kind of encouraging you and being like, this is your moment and just go for it. And so how did that really help you in figuring out a lot of the nuances that you wanted to bring into episode 3?
It's really interesting because it's the first time I've heard Owen say that he didn't like her when she walked into the room. Because and it's so interesting, that relationship between actor and writer, because the thing that I thought a lot about when writing it was he hasn't quite worked out. He doesn't have an understanding of what he's done. He doesn't have an understanding. He knows what he's done, but he doesn't have an understanding of it. And the second thing that's going on in that room, and the second reason why he's creating a fiction, is because he has spent 6 months in this facility with kids that he can't talk to, and then this young, interesting woman comes into the space, and she makes him feel important. And he hasn't felt important for a very long time, and so he's creating something that he thinks can impress her. He's trying to make her like him, and so all that episode is about deceit. It's constantly about deceit, and there's a sort of rough 3-act structure through it, which is this journey to truth. And the journey to truth is basically Jamie slowly pulling his own skin off, and you just see him slowly. And Owen is just so remarkable. Just such a remarkable actor, and it's the shock of my life that we got someone as amazing as him. But watching him pull that skin off time and time again through the whole episode was just thrilling.
Here.
Stephen, there's also so many incredible moments in your episodes and your performance, and the way that Eddie tries to hold his emotions inside, because he doesn't want to burden his family with his feelings. In episode 1, he's very much being present for his son, and in episode 4, it's for his wife and his daughter. And I was interested in just kind of, again, just finding that flow of emotion and finding the way that he's just always trying to protect them, even from his emotions.
I think as actors we're magpies, do you know what I mean? And you've got a Rolodex in there of stuff that you've experienced and things you've learned along your life yourself. And especially with where Eddie's concerned, he's based on the kind of men I grew up with, my uncles, people like that, you know what I mean? Specifically who we named him after, actually, my Uncle Eddie. And Eddie's not tactile with his boys, you know what I mean? He's never told him he loved him, but he's never hugged him either. So that was a conscious decision that I made very early on. And right up until, there's a moment where we're in a cell together, and it's beautifully written and beautifully constructed. But he tells him to make sure that he eats his cornflakes and eat your cornies, keep your strength up, when he should be giving him a hug and telling him he loves him and it's going to be all right. But he can't bring himself to do that. And then the actual first time he makes physical contact is when he's watching his son being strip searched. Do you know what I mean? And that's traumatic for him to take. He can't do nothing about that. He wants to jump in, but he can't. He realizes where he is, the situation, and he can't get aggressive, and he can't be forthright in any way, shape, or form. And it was the first time, and I just touched him on the shoulder, and that's the first time he actually has any kind of physical contact until the end when he actually hugs him. But that kind of as well came from my Uncle Eddie. He had a son, Edward, and our Edward passed away, and then a few years later, my Uncle Eddie lost his wife as well. And at both of those funerals, and I never saw our Eddie cry. I never saw him shed a tear. And he's a very stoic man. He's a very strong man. And there was one time we were in the kitchen, we were having a cup of tea, and I hadn't seen him for a while. And I asked him how he was getting on, and he said he's doing okay. And then he said to me, sometimes, lad, when I'm sat here on my own, I shout her name, and I forget that she's not there. And I just remember that just hit me, like, that really touched me. And I thought if I could take an ounce of that kind of, I don't even know what the word is, but if I could take that into the performance of Eddie, then that was what I was trying to capture, do you know what I mean? That kind of man. And then that's what we managed to do in that moment when he's in the bedroom on his own, and he's looking around at that bedroom, and he thinks, you know, I should have been in here more. I should have done more for my boy. And he cries when no one else can see him crying. That's when he sheds his own tears. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. Owen, one of the things that is so incredible in the way that you've played this role and the way that it was written is we get to see Jamie as a kid and as a child and, you know, some of that innocence that still exists, but then we also see the other side of him that was capable of taking someone's life. And, you know, I remember you saying that it took you a little while to find what that looked like when we see the anger in him. And was that something where the rehearsals really helped you to figure out how to play that side of Jamie?
Yeah, definitely, because when I first looked at the script, I had certain bits where I couldn't wait to perform, and the bits where I'm standing over, Jamie standing over Brian, he's like, when I'm looking at him in the script, it's like, but then sort of bits that I wait for last, because I haven't done that before, so it was new to me. So in rehearsals, it just couldn't come to me where Phil was saying, got to stand over Erin, don't blink, don't look down, and I just didn't come to me. I couldn't do it. But then by shoot week, I think I was perfectly fine to do anything that Phil, the director, told me to do. So it was hard coming to me, but by episode 1, I was perfectly comfortable because I was in a safe environment, because the people around me, the cast, the crew, everyone there was just lovely. So I was in a safe environment.
And he's such a wonderfully natural, gifted performer, do you know what I mean? He's a million miles away from the character that he plays. He's from I should hope so as well. No, he's from a wonderful family. I mean, as my nana used to say, he's from good stock. Do you know what I mean? His mum's wonderful, his dad's beautiful, and he comes from a really loving family, and he's had that support there. And they believe in his ability, do you know what I mean? And they, you know, they're prepared to, they go to the ends of the earth for their boy, do you know what I mean? And he's a credit to himself, but he's a credit to his mum and dad, because he's just an amazing actor. And he went to those places, you know what I mean? It wasn't easy, it was very difficult, but he had, as he said, you know, he had a lot of support. We had a child psychologist on set. He had a wonderful chaperone, but he had proper professionals around him as well, who created this beautiful platform for him to play. And he's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful man. Young boy he is, he's a wonderful young man.
And Erin, you know, in your episode as well, so much of it is the two-hander with Bryony and Jamie, but there's a moment where she leaves the room and there's a security guard in the room with her, and we get to kind of see this whole other side of, you know, microaggressions. He stands so close to her and he's asking her about her job and going, I reckon I could do your job, you know, completely diminishing her experience. And I wanted to ask you about the way that just created this whole other sense of tension and emotion, because she steps out of the room and it should be a moment of reprieve, but it just adds to everything for when she goes back into the room.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And again, I keep coming back to it, but it's just such a beautiful script. It's like all the work is done for you. Like, if you just put yourself and have the bravery to trust that the work is there, the prep is there, and if you just go step by step, one foot in front of the other, you'll get to where you need to be. And as you say, the minute that she leaves that room, all she's asking for is a moment to collect herself, and she doesn't get it. And I just think I love that you guys wrote that. I love that came from two men. I just love that. So yeah, I just think it's something that, it was very, I didn't even think twice. I was like, yeah, of course she doesn't get that. But then, yeah, she has to keep moving forward. Like I say, I keep coming back to it. If you understand, the magnitude of what she's aware of, how she's about to change this boy's life potentially, that is so intense. And I think I couldn't let go of the hope that she wanted for this kid to prove her wrong, and she just didn't want to make that decision. She didn't want to break this family and break this boy. So yeah, it's really hard to talk about even now. So I just think it was just a joy to embody that and to have the freedom to go on that journey and to go to those places. It doesn't roles like that don't come along very often, and yeah, it was gorgeous.
I mean, the work that all of you have done is so astounding. And Owen, I have to say, I don't think I've ever seen a debut performance as a first performance on screen that's as incredible as what you've done here. So I just want to say congratulations to you especially, and to all of you. Thank you so much for taking the